Welcome. This is Sabrina Monarch of monarchastrology.com bringing you the astrology forecast for July 8th to July 14th. So this week felt a little bit sensitive. Why? Because it's Cancer season still. Mercury is still in Cancer. It stations direct this week. And we have a few aspects to Chiron and Aries. So Chiron is a pain point. It relates to wounding and healing. It's a portal to the spiritual realm, to the beyond that comes from our various wounds and wounding. That's why when we go through something difficult, we may become greater people from it, or we go through something really challenging, something wounding, and we deepen our consciousness because of it. So it has that, dual side to it. And Chiron stations direct, it stations retrograde and is aspected by Mars. So there's a Mars conjunct Chiron. Mars also squares Mercury in Cancer. So when I was looking at all these transits, I just kind of felt like, ooh, like it's kind of sensitive. So that's where I'm coming from, and I'm going to pull up my slides. Okay. So in addition to this, the Sun in Cancer will also oppose Jupiter in Capricorn this week, and Jupiter is part of a triple lineup with Saturn and Pluto, and it's a pretty intense combination of planets in Capricorn. So there's a few different spots in the sky that feel like a little bit emotionally sensitive. So I was brought to meditations on crisis. I was thinking about the ways that in the heat of crisis, so we're in that kind of maybe panicky place. And I'm not saying that you may be there this week, but maybe you have spikes of anxious thoughts or something like that. And that in these moments, we have this capacity to transform, to really pay attention to the part of ourselves that is calling for help or calling for an upgrade, if you want to look at it that way. And that as we move into the eye of that crisis point, we may gain something from that experience. So crisis is this liminal state. Stability is shaken up, and the pieces of a new order are yet to fall into place. Our minds can run off with our fears, or we may try to distract ourselves. Alternatively, in the eye of the storm, so the trigger, the wound, the fear, there is an opening. This opening is a portal between earth and heaven, or concrete circumstance and immaterial spirit, or present reality and infinite possibility. Now, these are not, these dualities that I've just listed are not necessarily opposites, and I don't mean to imply them as such. But bear with me. Whenever we are in particularly liminal states, so in life transitions, when we're facing unknown outcomes, when we're worrying about the future, we have an opportunity to make contact with something beyond. We often do turn towards spirituality when we are anxious or under duress, right? By beyond here, so tuning into the beyond, I mean tapping into a new relationship with prayer or with faith, or receiving a vision, or connecting with a liberating healing modality, or having like a paradigm shift. And this can happen when we're in the heat, or when we're in the heat of crisis, or at the eye of a trigger point, when we're in this kind of liminal space. So whatever is up for you personally, the places in your life that you feel insecure, where stability in your life has been interrupted, or fears that run through your mind, I invite you to tune into the ways that this could be a healing process, that you can make a choice to interact with the story differently in these moments. How would you tell your own story if life were happening for you and not to you, for example? How would you define the ways that you are becoming or self-inventing at this time? Is there a narrative that brings empowerment and encouragement to you? And how can you choose to live by that? I think that if we are to imagine the ways that life is happening for us instead of to us, we can locate ourselves in a kind of hero's journey narrative and have a different perspective on the conflicts that we're facing. So here's our week in more detail. I'm going to dive into the transits more specifically after a few announcements. First, I am running a Kickstarter currently to fund the year ahead of astrology forecasts and Magic of the Spheres, which is my podcast episodes. June of this year marked the beginning of the 6th year of weekly content creation, and I wanted to invite support from community to help have a salary this year. So I'm offering some astrology downloadables, which are going to be awesome. I just finished working on the aspects to Pluto audio file, writing it, and I'm going to record it soon. And I'm also offering astrology readings and discounted tuition to 2 of my courses, which I'm going to tell you about in a moment. And right now we're at 60 backers, and already you've helped me raise nearly $11,000. I'm so excited and grateful. And my goal is to have 200 backers. So if you enjoy the content that I put out, I ask if you can pledge your support for a year ahead of content. There's many different options of how much you can support and different things that you can get from supporting. So I'm going to leave the link in the notes to this Kickstarter campaign. So more about these courses, the online presence as performance art class. So this one is about having a more fun and magical relationship with the internet. I don't believe that there's another course out there like it, because you might find a lot of courses about how to develop an online presence or how to boost your place in the algorithm or how to be a content creator. And all of that education is great. But I think that, do we really look at the philosophical, metaphysical, spiritual relationship that we have with the internet? So in this course, I'm presenting like an internet mythos, how to connect to the internet, or as I like to call it, the collective airwaves, in a more life-enhancing way. And also, how do you prepare yourself to be in the public? Everyone has fears and anxieties and hangups about being in the public or about being seen online. So when it comes to cultivating your online presence, I think that there's this side of getting into your persona, getting into the art of how you want to show up. And this can be deeply transformative to have a persona to step into. And it, should be authentic. It's not about being inauthentic. And then how do you work with the fears and resistances that you have in this process? So this course is highly unique. I'm really excited about it, and you can read more about it in the link that I'm sharing below. I've heard that reading the course page itself is shifting, so I would recommend that. And I also have an evolutionary astrology intensive coming up. This will be the 6th run of the course, and you can also get discounted tuition through the Kickstarter. And this is to introduce the paradigm of evolutionary astrology to you. So this is astrology from the perspective of the soul's ongoing evolution, where you've been in prior lives, what you've been developing in prior lives, what you've brought into this life with you, and how you can evolve in this lifetime. So all of the archetypes, the signs, the planets have these wisdom teachings attached to it as well. So I can be supporting you in having a more empowering relationship to all the archetypes so that you can see this arc of transformation. Where are your deepest struggles? Where can you find that in your chart? And what are some higher potential or higher octave ways that you can relate to those same placements? This is a really transformative class, and it's had a lot of positive testimonials, which you can also read on the page that I'll be sharing. And for both of these courses, if you have questions that you can't find an answer to on the course pages, that's where I seek to answer the logistical questions. If you have something personal, like how these classes may support you, where you're specifically at, don't hesitate to write me over email at sabrina@monarchastrology.com. And then I have a new episode of Magic of the Spheres with Jaleesa Cypress. We talked about the Pluto and Scorpio generation and this generation's relationship to social change, including the current racial justice movement. So you can find this episode where you listen to podcasts or in the link in the notes. Okay, here is our week. So on July 8th, Mars in 6 degrees of Aries will square Mercury retrograde in 6 degrees of Cancer at 3:41 a.m. Pacific. This Mercury retrograde in Cancer has potentially been expanding our inner mapping of our emotional reality. So, in other words, we've been feeling more. Additionally, our emotional responses have effectively detoured us, as Mercury retrogrades are apt to bring detours, from our typical agendas and ways of moving through the day. So when you're feeling emotional and it's a thing and you have to process it instead of just sweeping it away or going on with what you are doing. This square from Mars and Aries adds some urgency to that current dynamic, emphasizing the way that emotions can just flare up suddenly. This can create moments in which the heat of our interior reality confronts us with the necessity to discover new ways of adapting or reconciling with how we feel. At the beginning of Mercury retrograde, Colin Bedell made a concise and helpful, and as always, if you know him, very entertaining video about how simply identifying one's emotions during this transit can be a helpful tool for emotional regulation. And I'm also leaving that link in the notes. Then on July 10th, Venus in 9 degrees of Gemini will sextile Chiron in 9 degrees of Aries at 11:37 a.m. Pacific. Venus stationed direct after being retrograde May 12th to June 24th. Venus is now still in retrograde, post-retrograde shadow, meaning Venus is still catching up to the place that Venus originally stationed retrograde in, which was 21 degrees of Gemini. So we're in this kind of wrap-up phase of this transit. Venus retrogrades are journeys of the heart. We learn new things about our value, our self-esteem, and how we engage in relationships with others. It is a time of accelerated growth in all things Venus, which in addition to love encompasses our relationship with beauty, luxury, pleasure, aesthetic, and money. So if you reflect on how your experiences have been, you can see if you've been through a journey of the heart, or you can also keep in mind for every time Venus retrograde comes around to really hold it in kind of a ceremonial way, that Venus retrogrades are journeys of the heart and they can be engaged as such. So the sextile to Chiron and Aries right now suggests that this could be a beneficial time for integrating the lessons of the Venus and Gemini transit and the retrograde season. And to integrate this into our self-identity. Aries relates to self-discovery, which is Chiron is in Aries. And we can do this by reflecting or dialoguing about what we've learned recently. By going over it again and giving it words, we integrate, and we can also discover new angles that weren't available until we reflected. So this is fun to do, like if you want to go back and really reflect on what you've learned over the last few months, your answer to that question will evolve in the actual practice of collecting your thoughts. Gemini is the best at unlocking infinite angles of any given story or truth. One potential of this season of Venus in Gemini has been to discover and practice more loving self-talk. This isn't just saying some generic mantras or affirmations that don't do anything for you, but actually sourcing something very personal that is more elevated and kind in direct relationship to places where we may have been inwardly cruel, doubtful, or judgmental. So that does require actually being honest about what our mean and our thoughts are, like what we're thinking, and then editing them. And if we don't do that, we're just kind of running the script by default, and it may not be something that we want to be saying to ourselves. Imagine if you talked to other people the way that you're talking to yourself when you're being cruel to yourself. There would be probably some feedback in the field, or you wouldn't feel right about doing that. And we kind of have to do the same, extend the same grace towards ourselves. And as we reflect on ourselves and our experiences, it is possible that our traumas or unresolved hardships take up a lot of space and charge, like emotional charge. While it is often part of personal development and healing to be with these aspects of ourselves, one point of balance here might be holding a variety of lenses for self-contemplation rather than fixating on just a few. I'm inspired by something I read recently on Twitter by Therese Mailhote. I'm not totally sure how to pronounce the last name. She writes, "When I'm teaching students how to write about trauma, I often ask them to carry 5 other stories about themselves for protection, like a verbal medicine bundle. There's what happened to you, how you survived, and carry some other stories like how you learned to gut a fish, or how you used to bind your own books as a child, the time you stood up for yourself at work, occasions where you felt joy. Give yourself dynamism and let that dynamism inform your work." "We are more than what happened to us." This is still the quote. "But it's okay if you need to sit in the pain and execute how awful it felt. I support all victim and survivor stories any way you tell it. Holding 5 other stories is mostly a safety measure to not feel like I'm only one thing." End quote. So narrative is this identity creating process. We all have stories about ourselves. And narrative can help us process and digest experiences that we've had. If you look into your memory, it is full of narrative. It is really human to think in story. But one story can be told so many different ways. When it comes to change and moving toward goals, having the right mindset is highlighted. Often in like the personal development world, it is so much about mindset. But this applies as well for self-concept and memory, and the narratives that make up our identity either by choice or by default. So narratives that are just happening, versus ones that you've very intentionally chosen. Often, if we wish to make a change in our lives, we might need to look at the stories and narratives we have about ourselves that are continuing to generate the waking dream of our life. Like if your life was a movie and there was like a narrator reel talking about your story, and the narrator reel is connected to what's actually happening in the movie. It's not, there's not like a dissonance there, right? So that's what I mean by the waking dream. Like if you decide to have a different narrative, to spin a story differently for yourself, you'll notice your life actually starts to shift, similar to how we see that cohesion between what the narrator is saying and what's happening in a film. These narratives that we have can change if we are willing to, 1, identify what stories we are running honestly, and 2, creatively engage with the potential of sourcing a new angle of the story that we wish to live more fully into. July 11th, Chiron will station retrograde in 9 degrees of Aries at 2:09 p.m. Pacific. Chiron will station direct on December 15th, 2020 in 4 degrees of Aries. So it's just a small portion of Aries that this retrograde will happen in. And if you want to learn more about Chiron as an archetype, you can listen to a podcast interview I had with David Leskowitz, where I interviewed him about the astrological centaurs, and I'll also leave that link in the notes. Stationing planets and asteroids, Chiron is an asteroid, are these louder energies in the sky and in our experience when they station. So from the perspective of Earth, the celestial body appears to be coming to a standstill and then moving backwards through the zodiac. It's not actually moving backwards, it's just from our perspective, because we're rounding, one of us is rounding the corner, and so there's just a distortion of vision that can occur. But astrology is Earth-centric, so we're looking at our unique vantage point in the cosmos. And with Chiron and Aries emphasized in this way, and it's also conjunct Mars pretty closely, and that conjunction will go exact later in the week. Some themes emphasized at this time could be the following: self-assertion, how we respond to aggression or conflict, personal courage, our relationship with the masculine, the inner masculine, or the masculine in others, our relationship with vitality or lack thereof, our willingness to try new things, our willingness and capacity to bounce back from setbacks or failures. Chiron relates to this real thirst or drive for finding answers to complexly difficult situations. Chiron relates to the quest that we go on to find answers to what troubles us the most. The deepest vulnerability of this archetype is that we don't always find the answers that we seek. The possibility that we might not win can induce humility, deeper surrender, and deeper patience. Though through the pressure of experiencing complex problems, the chirotic journey is one of discovering wisdom. There are moments of breakthrough where what was before impossible becomes possible. And this phenomenon is connected to the healing arts, that there might be a key that unlocks new possibilities. And it is when questing that we find these keys. So just to reiterate this in a different way, when we're going through a kind of initiation, there's not a promise of success. That's kind of the pressure of initiatory processes, is that we don't know how it's going to go on the other end. And that induces a very deep vulnerability. And I think that Chiron is really what brings us in touch with that kind of liminal state between the wound or the problem and the solution, and all of the initiations that occur as we move toward finding wisdom. And then on July 12th, Mercury stations direct in 5 degrees of Cancer at 1:26 a.m. Pacific. And Mercury will leave retrograde shadow on July 26th, but it's still direct. Emotional intelligence is a cyclical journey as we continue to face new experiences and new challenges. It is easy to form ego concepts about ourselves when we have accomplished something, and to think that we are generally good at whatever that thing is, because at one point we developed it or experienced our own skillfulness. But perhaps this Mercury retrograde puts us on our toes a little bit, confronting us with some emotional experiences we thought we'd already figured out, and now they're up again. And so it calls for a lot of self-tenderness. Cancer already has this penchant for nostalgia and for the past, and dipping into this well can be nourishing at times. It may also be important to consider the context of this present moment, that it will be future nostalgia often, at least some aspect of it. So there may be something precious about now that will be fodder for future nostalgia. So why not be here now? And then the sun in 20 degrees of Cancer will trine Neptune retrograde in 20 degrees of Pisces at 11:43 a.m. Pacific. The trine between the sun and Neptune in water signs brings this dreamy intensification to our perception and our moods. I think of Cancer as having a soaking in bath water kind of quality, and we're just in the feelings of that particular bath. One form of self-care in Cancer is moving towards sources of real nourishment, which can involve pulling ourselves out of one state when it's time and moving into something else, which is like the opposite of wallowing. I mean, sometimes we want to stew in something, and other times you can feel when it's gotten kind of like, okay, time to get out of the bath and go do something else. The dreamy intensification of this transit can be found in enjoying and sinking deeper into the pleasures of life once we have moved toward them or initiated them, and then allowing ourselves to receive them. And then on July 14th, the sun in 22 degrees of Cancer will be opposite Jupiter retrograde in 22 degrees of Capricorn at 12:58 a.m. Pacific. While on the one hand, there's this desire to feel safe and secure with the Cancer archetype, the sun's light in this sign illuminates Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn in Capricorn, and reveals our doubts and basic fears. If you've ever had the experience of comforting a scared child and feeling this kind of deeper love and authority in your presence as you do so, that comes from showing up for them, this could be a quality to call upon yourself if you're facing anxiety or fear. Just to be able to give that kind of love back to yourself, or receive that from another if you have been in a position where you're asking for help and receiving that. Then Mars in Aries will conjunct Chiron, now retrograde in Aries, at 2:08 a.m. Pacific. Around the same time that security and safety needs are highlighted, with the sun in Cancer opposite Jupiter in Capricorn, Mars conjunct Chiron is an activation around courage. Mars and Aries both relate to severance and separation. Aries is birth, so the emergence of a distinct individual from the cosmic oneness, whether that is the non-differentiated state of the womb, but also kind of like the cosmos from which we come before we incarnate into specific beings. So there are threads in this Aries archetype of loneliness and isolation. And learning how to be in connection is this very powerful healing process for anyone who feels alienated. And of course, alienation is rampant. So the medicine that we find for alienation, super powerful. But for the purposes of this conversation, I want to share another angle. What are some of the healing powers of separation itself? Consider if you have a negative pattern or a place that you tend to self-sabotage, because that's always the way that the story has gone for you. Separating from our own history in certain instances can have a liberating quality. We can make a new choice and initiate a new path. Many of our fears can be based off of history or how things have happened in the past, even how things have happened in our genetic memory. And then we bind ourselves to that. Courage can sometimes take the form of having the willingness to engage a new experience within our reality, even if this is an area that we have encountered failure or disappointment in the past, or have this deep genetic or embodied memory of there being something bad or wrong happening in the past. And so when we're on the precipice of doing something new, all of that activation comes up. So consider if there's a need for some ceremony in your life when it comes to doing things that take courage. If we're entering new territory that we've never been able to get to before for whatever reason, we are at a threshold, one of moving beyond the limitations of the past and also stepping into the unknown future. These transitional moments can just happen. Sometimes they happen without our noticing. But sometimes there is a guiding process or a guiding value or a guiding figure that ushers us into the new. This can be as simple as being conscious of our breath as we mark a threshold, noticing when we feel fear, and when we're still on the path of doing something that feels right for us, and just breathing into that new moment. So these are the transits this week. I forgot to mention earlier on, please like this video and subscribe and hit the notification bell to get notified of further videos from this channel. The forecast that I share can always be found in written version at monarchastrology.com, and you can also sign up for my mailing list to get these forecasts delivered to you every week. And one other thing that I like to announce is that I do personal astrology readings, reading your natal chart. And I've also moved into doing mentorship, so longer term one-to-one mentorship, helping you with various goals that you have, using your natal chart as a map for your self-actualization. And I'm also kind of specializing in helping people with their online presence, and all of those inner processes around online presence that I was speaking of earlier when it comes to my course, but doing that really intimately with your process. This one-to-one mentorship is also for students of astrology, or anyone on a self-discovery path who wants to have like a much deeper relationship with your natal chart, and to also discover the empowerment of your natal chart. So if you're interested in that, I am accepting new clients, and you can email me at sabrina@monarchastrology.com to chat with me and set up a free consultation call. So I think that's it. Just remember to please like this video, and also leave a comment. Let me know what resonated with you. I would love to hear from you. All right, have a beautiful week.